All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to talk about the hidden power of language, specifically, how the names we use for violence, well, they aren't just simple labels. They're more like blueprints that literally build our entire understanding of what harm even is. I mean, think about it for a second. We hear these phrases all the time, right? Domestic violence, workplace violence. They sound pretty straightforward. But the big idea we're digging into today suggests that there's actually a really complex and powerful story happening just under the surface of those everyday words. And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. See, there's this tension. On one hand, naming violence based on where it happens is absolutely necessary for our legal system. It's the very foundation of justice. But, and this is a big but, there's also a cost. These exact same words can quietly change the whole story, shifting our focus in ways that have some serious real-world consequences. So, to really wrap our heads around this, the source material gives us this incredible metaphor to think of our language not just as a bunch of words, but as an actual architecture. It's a really powerful way to think about it, isn't it? You know, just like you can look at a building and learn about the society that made it, what they valued, their priorities, who held the power, the way we construct our language around violence, well, it tells us a whole lot about our own deep-seated beliefs about control, power, and what justice really means to us. Okay, so let's start with the foundation of this whole structure. Why these names that are tied to a location aren't just useful, but are actually completely non-negotiable. And let's be super clear on this point. This isn't just about choosing better words or being politically correct. Calling something domestic violence or workplace violence is a fundamental requirement. Without it, our legal and judicial systems simply wouldn't work. So how does a simple name become such a powerful legal anchor? Well, it's kind of like a chain reaction. First, the name creates an official legal category. That category then decides who's in charge of responding. That's the jurisdiction. From there, it triggers specific tools for protection, like restraining orders. And finally, it sets the rules for what kind of evidence you need in court. It's an entire system built on that one name. And that's really the bottom line here. Every single time a new policy is written or a judge grants a protection order, it's this specific location-based language that's making it happen. It's the engine of the entire system. And for that reason, we absolutely cannot afford to just get rid of it. Okay, but here's where we get back to that tension. What happens when that critical legal anchor starts to pull the whole narrative in a different direction? What happens when the place becomes the main story? You see, language is never neutral. It doesn't just hold facts and information like a container. It actively shapes our reality. It tells stories. And believe me, the stories we tell about violence matter more than we can possibly imagine. There's actually a name for this. It's called narrative framing. The easiest way to think about it is like a camera lens. The words we pick zoom in on certain things, and they push other things completely out of the picture. And that frame influences everything: who we focus on, who we blame, and how we think the problem should be solved. And this right here is the core issue that the source material points out. When we say domestic violence over and over again, our focus can start to drift, subtly, almost without us noticing, away from the actual person who is causing the harm, and it lands on the home. And you can really see how this plays out. Suddenly, the person who misused their power kind of fades into the background. And instead, what do we start talking about? We talk about the troubled relationship or the dysfunctional family. The location, the situation, suddenly becomes the main character in the story, not the person and their choices. Now, this isn't just some abstract academic debate. This shift in our story has a real, tangible, and often devastating human cost. Let's talk about what that actually looks like for people. So because of this narrative framing, the stigma of what happened starts to stick to the survivor's identity instead of staying with the act of violence itself. This creates what the source calls a secondary harm. It's this extra layer of judgment and shame delivered quietly through our words. And what's the result? A lot of people feel discouraged from ever speaking up, and many actually pull away from the very systems that were built to help them. And this is just so critical to understand. When a survivor rejects a label like domestic violence survivor, it's not usually because they're in denial about what happened to them. It's often an act of resistance. They're pushing back against a name that feels less like a description of an event and more like a box filled with judgment, blame, and shame. So here we are with this really deep conflict, right? The language is legally critical, but it can be narratively harmful. So, where do we go from here? The point isn't to tear down the whole building, but to learn how to be much more conscious architects. And let's be really clear, the solution is not to just stop using these legal terms. We literally can't do that. The real goal is to become aware of this double duty they're doing and to take responsibility for the stories we might be accidentally building every single time we use them. So the big takeaway is a call for us to be more mindful. It's about taking that extra second to just pause and to reflect, to ask ourselves, okay, what story am I actually telling with these words? Am I focusing on the person responsible for the harm, or am I accidentally blaming the place or the relationship? Ultimately, every single one of us is an architect of narrative. The words we choose, they lay the foundation for how our society understands harm, how we treat survivors, and how we hold people accountable. So the question this explainer really leaves us with is a big one. What kind of story will you help build?